Hello, and help me welcome Bill O'Brien.
Hi,
Bill,
Carl. How are you?
okay. Bill was Speaker of the House in one term of
One
mine,
turn,
and
yeah.
you were for several terms just a representative up
I
there
was
out
up
of.
there for about 5 terms,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what surprises me, I intended to go up there when somebody asked me to run for a term or two, and find somebody else to ask to run, but it just sort of developed beyond that.
Yeah, I sort of got into a habit, and you did a good job on that. I
Thank
remember
you.
how you
Thank
were
you.
able to balance a budget after it was way off on the estimates. So.
Yeah, and it's great when you're a citizen legislator because you're not aware that there are supposed to be limitations on how you do things. And so
Mm-hmm.
we looked at the fact that it's clear we weren't going to have enough money,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't realize, I'd only been there 2 terms. That was actually the beginning of my third term when I was Speaker. I didn't realize, oh no, you're supposed to find out how much everybody wants to spend and then go find the money. And I figured, it only makes sense
That's
to figure out how
backwards.
much money you have.
Yeah.
And so we went to Ways and Means,
Mm-hmm.
the committee that determines the amount of money you have. Real good people over there, good staff, and they told us this is the amount of revenue you're going to have coming in given the national and state economic conditions. And then we did something I thought that would make a lot of sense. And fortunately, my colleagues went along with it. We went to the House with a resolution, and we said we want it to be resolved. We want you to instruct us whether or not we should spend more money than that. And the resolution says don't spend more money than that. House overwhelmingly passed it. And
Mm-hmm.
so then we turned to the agencies and the governor and all the legislators and everyone said that this is how much money we have. And so folks would come in and say, well, my activity is very important. We should do it. And I'd listen to them and I'd say, yeah, I mean, it sounds fairly important. Tell me whose activity isn't important, and we'll be glad to reduce their budget. Help me find the money. And the end result of that process was two things. One is that we were able to reduce state-funded spending, the funding that's directly paid by the citizens of New Hampshire, by a little over $800 million.
Mm-hmm.
Reduce state-funded spending almost by 18%, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the New York or California government budgets. We have a budget that's still talked about in terms of tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. So we reduced it a little over $800 million. And the other thing that happened was that the rhetoric became very heated and at times hateful. I always remember somebody getting up during one of the budget hearings and saying, obviously rhetorically, but this is the way they viewed things, that grandma will be found,
Oh, yeah,
in the
that's right.
snowbank in the springtime after you guys finish your work. Well, she wasn't, and I dare say that most of your viewers and most of the people in New Hampshire didn't notice a lot different in terms of their lives with us spending $800 million less
Mm-hmm.
of their money.
Mm-hmm.
What they didn't see was what didn't happen as well, that we would have had to increase all of their taxes to the tune of about $300-400 per person
Mm-hmm.
in New Hampshire. We'd
Mm-hmm.
have to go to a family and get a couple $1,000s more to make up for that deficit. We came in after we'd been in the minority. Republicans came in after we'd been in the minority, and it was pretty clear. Some of our fellow legislators are pretty candid, and they say, "Well, you guys are the ones that are going to have to put income tax in place." They're kind of gleeful about it, and we didn't, and they weren't gleeful about that.
Well, now that you've announced that you're looking at running for the Senate in the coming election, you're investigating, I guess, is the word that you
They require us
use.
to say we're exploring,
Exploring,
exploratory
exploring. Okay,
phase, yeah, which
and
has some legitimacy. I'm actually doing that.
yeah, oh, I know it's a big decision
Yeah.
because it's well, you have to first thing you have to find out you can get enough money to support
Enough money, I've been going around to various groups. A couple of nights ago, I was with gun owners in New Hampshire, the board of directors there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy enough. I've been in politics long enough that I love it that people are listening to what I'm saying. But more important is to listen to what these groups are saying, what their issues are. And that's part of the exploration is what can I do for you, if anything, in Washington? And obviously, and unfortunately, Washington is where a lot of decisions are made. And actually,
Right.
one of the things I'd like to do is drive decision making back down to the
Right.
states and back down to the lowest level closest to the people as possible. But we've made the national government a very powerful entity, and so a lot can be done there. And so I'm going to go around to groups that I have a natural affinity to, and I supported me in the past. The Second Amendment community, the life community, folks that are looking for limited government or liberty concerns, business concerns, people who are creating jobs.
And you were looking out for the results too. You always were results oriented, and you wanted to make sure that something was working the way that it was intended to. And if
Right.
not, you'd go out and correct it.
Yeah, my favorite example was we heard about this business. The owner of it came to us, longstanding company in the North Country. And this fellow said, I inherited this business from my father a couple of decades ago. And it turns out that before that, he had gone from a weekly payroll to, I guess it was a biweekly. I don't think it was twice, biweekly, every other week. And it so happened that the Department of Labor came in and audited us for some other issue, and we were okay on that issue. But they came across that we had a biweekly payroll. They looked back in their records, and they couldn't find that my father had given them notice under some law that says you're supposed to give the Department of Labor, State Department of Labor notice if you go from weekly to biweekly. So now they've imposed a fine on us of $500 a week, and it's coming up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The craziness of that it's in many different levels. One is the Department of Labor is running itself on fees and fines,
That's
so
right.
it's incentivized to do that. But the craziness of it is the Department of Labor should be working with businesses and working with workers to have safe places, but places that are producing good jobs for New
Right.
Hampshire citizens. And fining a business for something that had nothing to do with health and safety was a
Right.
paper-keeping error was totally wrong. So, the thing you can do as speaker, and the thing you can do as a legislator, as you were, Carl, is correct that. So we passed legislation that said if the Department of Labor does an inspection and comes across a paper
Right.
violation, you didn't put the poster up, you didn't notify us that you're going from weekly to bi-weekly, they gave a warning. And they can only come back after a certain amount of time, 30 days of the warning being in effect, and if the violation continues, only then can they impose a fine.
Yeah.
That's working with business.
That's right.
That's making sure the laws are being carried out, and it's not endangering employees. If there's a health violation, it needs
You
to be
got to
corrected
work
right
with them. Yeah, you
now.
got to give them like a warning or something
Yeah.
that's, hey, something's a little, and as long as it's not as serious. And I served on that Rules and Regulations Committee that you set up, and I saw many more examples of things like that. That was sometimes you wondered, as you say, they lived on the fines that they got. That some of that wasn't, hey, we're a little short this coming month, we got to go out and find somebody, to get the income.
Yeah, in part of this budgeting process, one of the things that I did, and nothing unusual about this, I invited all the state agency heads to come in and talk with the commissioners and so forth, and they would come in and the judiciary talk about how important what they're doing and initiatives and so forth. We actually put a little bit more money into judiciary because they were engaging in some really useful reform, by the way. But the insurance department came in, the labor department came in and said, glad to meet with you. We need nothing from you. I go, what do you mean? Because we pay for our own way, fees and fines. Now that's wrong.
Yeah,
That really is
that's
wrong.
right. Yeah.
And we would have corrected it. That was kind of a second term effort, but we didn't get that second term.
Yeah, well, I know because there were a lot of small businesses that came in and the rules and regulations that they complained about, and people saying that somebody that they used as a courier, they wanted to make an employee,
Right.
and get some income from him.
Right. And
It's crazy.
whenever you have a government bureaucracy working, one of the things that doesn't control it is what controls the private sector. I started a company since I was speaker, and I have 7 or 8 employees, software company. And I have to be very careful not to irritate my customers. And yet, government doesn't have to be very careful not to irritate taxpayers.
Right.
And so we, for example, had one person who came to us and was complaining about two things. One is he said, I was audited, they were wrong, and basically it came down to you're going to have to hire an attorney. It will cost you $30,000 or $40,000 to oppose us. You may win, they said, you may not. The legal counsel he contacted said you will win. But it'll cost you 30 or 40,000.
Sure.
We'll compromise with you for 20,000. So he complained, I had to do that. You know,
Yeah.
why is this happening to me? And the other thing he complained about, and you'll get a kick out of this in a very sad way, is he said, I sent off the check to pay that compromise, and I signed it with a fountain pen, and it came back to me with another fine being imposed, interest for not paying off the fine, a compromise, and they said, don't sign your checks with a pencil. And the person looked at it and thought it was a pencil signature. And that sort of craziness. Now, you know, as a business, you wouldn't do that.
No.
And if you thought your customer hadn't done something properly, you'd call your customer and say, "Gee, the bank probably won't accept this. Could you give me send somebody over and
Yeah.
can you give me another check? Or
Yeah.
can I send this back to you and get another one?" It's just craziness. And so that's almost something that you can't avoid with government activity, which is why in my philosophy and the philosophy of many who look at for limited government, that we're looking for a government that is modest in its goals and has less impact on our lives, because the impact is going to be very valuable in some ways. If it has an army defending our borders, it's going to be very intrusive and unfair when it goes much beyond its limited mandate.
Well, your experience during those 2 years and afterwards with your business, is that going to help you if you get elected to the Senate? You think you can do something to clear the swamp, as they say?
It is. You know, our representation in Washington at this point is abysmal. They aren't leaders.
Mm-hmm.
They, in many ways, are an embarrassment. You look at Jeanne Shaheen, for example, which presented a bill that asked nothing more of doctors and hospitals than to preserve the life of a child born alive. The bill was called the Born Alive Act. Now, she tried to make it into an abortion bill. You can be where you want on abortion when it comes to that bill. In our party, people care about life, but they struggle with the issue of when does life begin. But clearly, a child
That's
in a hospital room, alive,
right.
born, is a life to be preserved. We pride ourselves in these stories of hospitals going extraordinary distances and taking extraordinary measures to preserve a life. Yet Jeanne Shaheen voted against that bill because she was told it was viewed as an abortion bill. That's a complete lack of leadership.
Right.
You know, as I've said in a few different forms, the Democrat Party at this point has been captured by a radical fringe, and it behooves some of their elder statesmen, such as Jeanne Shaheen, to bring them back to reality. She wants us to believe that she's everyone's grandmother, but she can't be the adult at the Socialist Kitty Party. She
Right.
can't say, this doesn't make sense. We save babies' lives. We don't condemn them to starvation and death through lack of medical care. Look at when she was given the opportunity to pass a legislation that repudiated the new Green Deal. She was asked to vote on that resolution. And all she could do was vote present. She couldn't say, as anyone of common sense would say, we're not going to do away with plane travel. We're not going to abandon all our structures in the next 10 years and build new ones. We're not going to abandon fossil fuels, which have given us prosperity of unimaginable proportions, even starting with World War II and what our economic situation was then, and the prosperity that's spread throughout the world. We're not going to do that. environmental impact and climate change and so forth. These are important issues, but we're not going to be crazy. She couldn't stand up and do that. You know who wasn't present at that vote? Were
No.
the people of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Because the people of New Hampshire, to a person, I dare say, other than if you're part of that radical fringe, would say, no, of course we're not going to do that. We're going to have to vote against that.
We see that problem, though, even in the state legislature now. They're so locked, you don't see any variation. Maybe one or two at, I know, a particular thing. Maybe it was a gun right or maybe something like that that they varied from. Otherwise, it's a block now.
Yeah.
And if
yeah.
it's not, if you don't stay in that block, you're not going to get any support from the national.
Remember that study we did? I think it was when I was speaker, right before I was speaker, but certainly we were discussing it at that point. Somebody went back and looked at like 4 or 5 New Hampshire legislative sessions, terms rather, I should say. And they said, let's find out who votes, who's most bipartisan between the two parties. So they asked a question. In those instances where a majority of one party votes a certain way in a bill in opposition to a majority of the other party, how many of each side vote for it? And what they found is when the Democrats vote in a majority against a bill that the Republicans vote in the majority, it's 98.7%, I think was, vote for that. Republicans, on the other hand, when you have that same dynamic, they're voting in a majority against something Democrats are voting in a majority, it's only about 85%. I dare say that there's 2 different motivating factors there. I do believe the colleagues I served with, who are great legislators, are sitting there trying to think through bills and what's good, and they'll come to a bill with the same philosophy, maybe of limited government, low taxes and freedom and liberty and personal responsibility, free markets, the things we always talked about up there, and reach a different result. I mean, you may, for example, I know a lot of my colleagues in Nashua came to me when I was speaking and we talked about subsidizing train travel, commuter train in Nashua. We saw that differently, and yet they weren't abandoning their beliefs, and I didn't go, so you're out of the party now because you're voting against what I want on that, and yet the motivating factor for the other party is basically control of government, and that's much more.
It's control and power.
Yeah. Well, one term I sat next to a Democrat representative, a real nice lady, very, very smart lady. She was actually from Nashua, so I won't mention her name, just no point to it. And I liked her a lot. We get along really well, and she would sit there and say, "Oh, I know I shouldn't vote this way on this," and I'd say, "It doesn't make sense." And I said, "Before you vote that way, before you vote more funding for this program, before you vote more super rights for this now new identity group that you've come up with, what's the limiting principle? How much is enough?
Yeah.
What are your goals here?" And she said, "Well, I don't know. They just told me to vote for it, and I'll be in trouble if I don't." And you go, geez, it's not a great way to legislate.
No, I'm surprised that there are that many people up there, but I see what was happening with our Lowell, and now that it's all Democrat. Either they're absent or they're going with the crowd. There's no variation.
They have 2 things going for them, Carl. One thing they have going for them, and we've discussed this at times, is they have a more attractive vocabulary, an easier vocabulary, a vocabulary that speaks to kind of elemental beliefs. They talk about it has to be fair, or it has to be equal. And those are things, those are words of comfort in a political conversation. We talk about words that challenge people. We talk about liberty, and we talk about free market. We don't ask. We say it's not right to redistribute what doesn't belong to you. That can't be a goal of government seizure of someone's property. Is that they just want to give it to somebody else. Our beliefs lead to greater prosperity. This prosperity we see today
Yeah.
is a result of free markets. But it's so much easier to say, why does Bill Gates need so much money?
Yeah.
Or it's easier to be Jeannie Dench, the current state senator from the Bedford district that goes down towards the Keene area there, saying that any family that earns more than 133,000 a year doesn't watch its pennies and deserves to have them taken away in a very progressive income tax. The percentage of which, by the way, is higher than Massachusetts. And you know, she wants more money in government because it's fair. So
And
that's
fairness is who decides fairness?
well, you know, and that's it. Fairness is decided in the end by government and how much
Yeah.
control are you going to have over government. But your child never comes to you and says, I want more freedom.
Yeah.
I want more liberty. I'm really thinking that we should have some free markets here, so I'll find some money for my dinner that I don't want to eat. You know, they basically tell, oh, it's not fair. It's not
Right.
fair, because that's sort of the fundamental principle that they understand, but it doesn't work well when you tell government to be fair, because the only thing that the government can do is try to determine what fairness is, and a lot of people aren't going to go along with it, and when they don't, then government has to be coercive.
And the same rules are for everybody. No,
Right.
no difference according to the situation of the person involved. I
Right.
think that's what bothers me the most. I like to have a choice in what I want to do. It's my life, and I like to be able to have some choice in how free I am.
That's right. And so the choice that we have and the choice that we try to promote is one that says, take responsibility for yourself, but enjoy the benefits of it. Certainly, we're going to take care of those who are challenged. There are people that arrive at a state where they're physically disabled, or they're elderly, or circumstances have taken money away from them. Maybe there's been a divorce. Maybe there was even a bad decision in the past when there was a child before there was a marriage, for example, and there aren't two adults trying to make sure the child's. And so you certainly take care of people in that situation, but always with an eye, when you can, of how do we give them the best welfare in the world, which is their ability to earn a paycheck and take care of themselves.
Right.
If we don't have a society that says you have the opportunity to succeed in fantastic ways, unbelievable ways, you can become Bill Gates, you can become Warren Buffett, then we're going to have a society where people are going to start checking out. You know, I always think of, and I actually met him. I'm getting a little bit on in age here. So I lived in Germany with my father, was in the military as a colonel in the army, and we lived over in Germany during the Cold War. And we'd come across some East German refugees, and I remember them talking with some of them, and they would say, you know, when over in East Germany, we pretend to work and the government pretends to pay us. and you know, they had a life that was certainly one that wouldn't lead to starvation, but didn't lead to great medical advances,
No.
didn't lead to really fine houses, didn't lead to really developed automobile industry. You know, I don't know if you ever saw one of those Trabants that they used to have over there.
No.
This was the car of East Germany. It was made out of fiberglass,
Oh,
and
okay. I didn't see one of
it
those.
could go about 80 kilometers an hour. Shortly after, in 1989, when the wall came down, the German government, and the country became united, the German government banned them from the Autobahn. Because what was happening is you get a little caravan of Trabants coming along, kind of tragic, and you get some big BMW or Mercedes coming along and just like sweep them all up. And, you know, that was
Yeah, I saw some of those. I was over in East Germany a couple of times
yeah,
while
the
it was still East
Trabants. Yeah,
Germany.
they're actually
On
because
business.
again, it's a socialist regime, and no one's sitting there going, "I got to come up with a better car, and I can make a lot of money." So what they did was they ripped off a 1950-ish
Yeah.
Fiat design and just kind of reproduced it. And instead of having sheet metal, they used real thin fiberglass. But we see it all the time, and you know, we see it in Venezuela now. We see it throughout the world. You know, when people turn to socialism, in the end, it goes bad. And I don't want to hear what Bernie Sanders says, that Denmark and Sweden and
Oh,
Norway,
yeah.
they're not socialists.
No.
They have greater degree of capitalism at this point than the United States does. Sweden 20 years ago decided this is not
Yeah.
working
Right.
and fundamentally reform their system. So you asked, what about this federal race? Well, I think there's a real embarrassment that I think I share with a lot of people who live in New Hampshire, that the congressional delegation we've sent to Washington doesn't speak to the strength and the
Right.
best values of New Hampshire and our country. The things we talk about, freedom and free market and a Republican, a Democratic Republican form of government are things that they're not taking, ideals that they're not taking to Washington. We
Well,
deserve better. The country deserves better from us.
definitely it does. And I was just going to ask, what do you think we have to do to get our Republican base out, the one that didn't bother coming to the last election? Because we're going to need every voice that we can on the Republican side, on the conservative side, but in a principled side, it's going to give us a better life, because I think we're headed in the right direction, but all of a sudden this last year, the legislation that came through here, as well as what's happening in Washington, if you can say anything's happening other than garbage, how do we get this all straightened out?
It has to be a full court press. I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, we certainly have to be assertive and unabashed. I have always tried to bring that to the political conversation, and we have to call them out when they engage in outrageous political rhetoric. They always called me a racist. They always called me a misogynist. They called me bully. And we ought to sensitize people to the understanding that they do that to conservatives and Republicans all the time, and it's no longer acceptable. George Bush and Ronald Reagan and Mitt Romney and President Trump, they're not all fascists and racist. And that's unacceptable to refer to people that way. Then we have to look at where the opportunities are to grow our base, and we have to look at those who haven't been participating. We have to provide solutions. If we say we're opposed to the one-payer medical insurance situation, then we have to say, where's the solution? There are solutions there. Expanded health service accounts, HSAs, allowing us to purchase our own insurance and take the money that we save and keep it.
Right.
That in those HSAs.
The savings accounts.
So there's a way we can journey back to freedom.
I hope that we can do that. I know it's going to be difficult, and we have to have a better way of communicating. And I hope our public access TV helps us do that. And so, because we're going to have, this show is going to have more and more people on proposing better things for all of us.
And I wanted to bring that up. This is an important thing that you're doing, because this is part of the way we do it. More people ought to be doing what you're doing here, Carl.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you, Carl.
That's a wrap.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.